The janitor's weathered hand stopped his second expulsion with 5 words that would shatter everything Robert Mason thought he knew about power, privilege, and the invisible people who held his future in their calloused palms. "I'll vouch for the boy." Principal Hayes's office smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams, a far cry from the lavender-scented sanctuary at Ashford Prep, where Robert's previous expulsion had been delivered with regret and expensive letterhead. Here, the fluorescent lights flickered like a dying heartbeat, casting shadows across Hayes's weathered face as he pushed the expulsion papers across a desk that wobbled even when nobody touched it. "Second time's the charm, apparently," Hayes said, his voice carrying none of the theatrical outrage Principal Thornton had wielded like a weapon. This was something worse. Disappointment so profound, it sat in the room like a third person. 3 weeks, Mr. Mason. You lasted 3 weeks before deciding to turn our entire grading system into your personal playground. Welcome back, my amazing family and friends. If you're tuned in and excited for today's story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I've got another fascinating story coming your way that you definitely won't want to miss. Now, let's get back to the story. Robert slouched in the plastic chair, not leather, he noted with bitter satisfaction, just cheap plastic that stuck to the back of his thighs, and studied his cuticles with the practiced disinterest of someone who'd been in this position before. The script was familiar. Adult lectures, parent gets called, money changes hands, problem disappears. The venue had changed, sure, but the play remained the same. "It was just a prank," Robert said, echoing the words that had served him so poorly at Ashford Prep. Some people never learned. Robert Mason was one of them. Nobody got hurt. Nobody got hurt? Hayes leaned back, and his chair squeaked like a mouse being strangled. Tell that to Jennifer Morrison, whose scholarship application just got flagged because our system showed she was failing chemistry, a class where she actually has a 98%. Tell that to Carlos Mendez, whose college scouts saw he dropped from a 4.0 to a 2.1 overnight. Tell that to the 214 students whose futures you treated like a joke because you were bored. The words landed differently than they had at Ashford. Maybe it was the fluorescent lighting or the absence of mahogany and brass, or the fact that Hayes looked tired in a way that suggested he'd been tired for years and Robert was just another weight on shoulders already bowed. Whatever it was, Robert felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest, not quite guilt, but guilt's distant cousin, discomfort. My father can make donations to fix whatever. Your father's money, Hayes interrupted, is why you think you can fix everything. But let me tell you something, son. There are problems in this world that don't take checks. There are consequences that don't care about your last name or your zip code or how many zeros are in your trust fund. Robert opened his mouth to respond with something cutting, something that would re-establish the pecking order, but the door opened before he could speak. The cleaning cart appeared first, its wheels clicking against the doorframe with a sound like distant thunder. Then came Rachel Gabriel. Robert had seen her before, of course. She was part of the background scenery at Riverside, invisible in the way that service people always were to boys like Robert, as present and unnoticed as air. She wore her grey uniform like it was tailored, her head wrap catching the awful fluorescent light, and somehow making it look intentional, almost regal. She was probably in her late 40s, with hands that looked like they'd scrubbed 1,000 floors, and eyes that suggested they'd seen more than that. Sorry, Principal Hayes, she said, her voice carrying the musical lilt of someone who'd grown up somewhere warmer, somewhere with more sun and less fluorescent despair. I didn't know you had someone in here. I can come back. It's fine, Rachel, Hayes said, waving her in. We're just finishing up. Mr. Mason here is being expelled. Again. Rachel's eyes flicked to Robert, and he felt something he rarely experienced. Being truly seen. Not assessed for his value or his father's net worth, but actually observed, like she was reading a book written in a language only she understood. Again, she repeated, and there was something in her voice, not judgment exactly, but a kind of weary recognition, like she'd seen this story before and knew how it ended. He hacked into our computer system and changed everyone's grades, Hayes said, standing up to hand Rachel a coffee mug that had seen better decades. As pranks go, it's certainly creative. As reasons for expulsion, it's airtight. Robert watched the exchange with growing irritation. They were talking about him like he wasn't there, like he was a problem to be discussed rather than a person to be addressed. At Ashford, at least the adults had the decency to perform the theatre of caring. Here, Hayes was ready to sign the papers, and Rachel was more concerned with coffee mugs. "Where will he go?" Rachel asked, and Robert's irritation sharpened into something defensive. "Not your problem," Robert said, his voice coming out harsher than intended. "Not anyone's problem here. I'll land on my feet. I always do." Rachel turned to him fully then, and Robert felt the temperature in the room drop about 10 degrees. She had the kind of gaze that made you want to sit up straighter, to fix your collar, to maybe apologize for things you hadn't even done yet. "You think you'll land on my feet?" she asked, and there was something almost amused in her voice, like Robert had just told a joke, and she was the only one who got the punchline. "Baby, you've been falling your whole life. You just haven't hit the ground yet because your daddy keeps building floors underneath you." The words hit like a slap, sharp and unexpected. Robert felt his face flush, felt anger rise in his throat like bile. Who was this woman, this janitor, this nobody, to talk to him like that, to see through him like he was made of glass? "You don't know anything about me," Robert said, standing up so fast his chair scraped against the linoleum, with a screech that made everyone wince. "Don't I?" Rachel set down the coffee mug and crossed her arms, and suddenly she didn't look like a janitor at all. She looked like a judge, or a queen, or maybe both. "Let me guess. Rich daddy, absent or overworked. Mama probably checks out with pills or charity galas. You got every toy, every opportunity, every advantage except the one that matters. Someone telling you no, and making it stick. So you keep pushing, keep testing, keep burning bridges because deep down you're terrified that if you stop, someone might notice there's not much underneath all that money and bravado." The silence that followed was so complete Robert could hear his own heartbeat. Hayes had frozen with a pen halfway to the expulsion papers. Robert felt like he'd been filleted, like Rachel had opened him up and shown everyone the hollow space where his character should have been. "That's," Robert started, but his voice cracked. "You can't what, tell the truth?" Rachel's expression softened slightly, like she was looking at a wounded animal instead of a spoiled rich kid. "Baby, I've been cleaning schools for 23 years. I've seen every kind of student there is. The ones who'll make it, the ones who won't, and the ones who could go either way depending on who shows up for them." "And what am I?" Robert demanded, hating how much he wanted to know the answer. Rachel studied him for a long moment, and Robert had the unsettling feeling she was measuring something he couldn't see, weighing factors he didn't understand. "You," she said finally, "are a boy standing on a cliff edge thinking he can fly when he's never even learned to walk right." Hayes cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "Rachel, I appreciate the insight, but—" "Don't expel him," Rachel said, turning to Hayes with the kind of authority that made Robert wonder who was really in charge of this conversation. Hayes blinked. "Excuse me. Don't expel him. Give him one more chance. Rachel, this is his second expulsion. He hacked into our— I know what he did. I also know that throwing him out solves your problem but not his. And maybe it's not my place to say, but I'm saying it anyway. This boy needs someone to believe he can be better, not someone else to give up on him." Robert stared at Rachel like she'd grown a second head. She was advocating for him. The janitor whose kid he'd made fun of was standing in a principal's office arguing for his second chance. The cognitive dissonance made his head spin. "And why would you do that?" Robert asked, his voice smaller than he'd intended. I said things. About your son. About you." Rachel's smile was sad and knowing. "Because I believe in second chances, Robert. The good Lord gave me a few, and I'd be a hypocrite not to pass them along. But more than that, I see something in you that you don't see in yourself yet." "What?" The word came out desperate, hungry. "Possibility," Rachel said simply. "You're not a bad kid. You're a lost one. And lost can be found if someone's willing to look." Hayes set down his pen and rubbed his temples like he was developing a migraine in real time. "Rachel, even if I wanted to give him another chance, and I'm not saying I do, what would that look like? He's proven he can't be trusted. He's proven he doesn't respect this institution or his fellow students. What possible reason could I give the school board for keeping him? Tell them I'll vouch for him, Rachel said, and Robert's world tilted sideways. You'll vouch for him, Hayes repeated slowly, like he was testing the words for hidden traps. You, a custodian with no authority over student discipline, will vouch for a millionaire's son who's been expelled twice and shows absolutely no remorse. That's right, Rachel said, and there wasn't a trace of doubt in her voice. I'll vouch for him, on one condition. Here it comes, Robert thought. The catch, the angle. Everyone wanted something, and he'd learned to recognize the moment when hands started reaching for his father's wallet. But Rachel wasn't looking at him like he was an ATM. She was looking at him like he was a project, or maybe a test, or possibly both. What condition? Hayes asked, though his tone suggested he was already regretting engaging with this conversation. Rachel turned to Robert, and her expression was serious enough to make him straighten his spine involuntarily. He works with me. Every day after school, 4 hours minimum. He learns what it means to clean up his own messes, literally and figuratively. He does this until I say he's done, until I believe he's learned what he needs to learn. And if he quits or complains or treats me or my job with anything less than respect, then he's out. No appeals, no second chances after the second chance. Deal? Robert's mind raced. Work with the janitor? Scrub floors and empty trash cans like some kind of common laborer? The thought was absurd, humiliating. His friends would never let him live it down, except he didn't have friends anymore. Ashford had exiled him. Riverside was about to do the same, and something about the way Rachel was looking at him, not with pity or contempt, but with challenge, made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, this was exactly what he needed, even if it was the last thing he wanted. Fine, Robert heard himself say, the word escaping before his pride could wrestle it back. Deal. Hayes looked between them like they'd both lost their minds, which was fair because Robert was beginning to suspect they had. You're serious? Both of you? Dead serious, Rachel said. Apparently, Robert muttered. Hayes picked up the expulsion papers, studied them for a long moment, then slowly, almost reluctantly, fed them into the shredder beside his desk. The sound of Robert's second expulsion being destroyed was surprisingly loud in the small office, like something breaking or something being born. Against my better judgment, Hayes said, I'm going to allow this. But understand, Mr. Mason, this is your last chance. Not your second chance or your third chance, your last one. You step out of line even slightly and I won't need papers. You'll be gone before you can even speed dial your father's lawyers. Understood? Understood, Robert said, and was surprised to find he meant it. Rachel extended her hand to Robert, and after a moment's hesitation he shook it. Her grip was firm, calloused, strong, the handshake of someone who'd built their life with actual labor instead of leveraged buyouts and quarterly earnings. Tomorrow, she said, 3:30 sharp. Don't be late and don't wear anything you care about. We've got work to do. As Robert left the office, he caught his reflection in the hallway windows, the expensive haircut, the designer clothes that were supposed to be casual but cost more than most people's car payments, the face of a boy who'd never really worked for anything in his life. He looked exactly the same as he had an hour ago, but something felt different, like a gear had shifted inside him, and now everything was moving in a direction he hadn't planned. Behind him, he could hear Rachel and Hayes talking in low voices, probably discussing what a terrible idea this was, how it would never work, how Robert Mason was a lost cause dressed in Tom Ford and delusion. Maybe they were right. But as Robert walked down the hallway, past lockers covered in stickers and dreams, past classrooms full of students who actually cared about their grades, past the trophy case that hadn't seen victory since 1997, he felt something he hadn't experienced in longer than he could remember. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he'd been given something precious. Not another floor beneath his feet to break his fall, but a hand reaching down into the hole he'd dug for himself, offering to pull him out if he was brave enough to grab it. Tomorrow would tell if he was. The Mason penthouse had floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city look like a toy set. all miniature buildings and ant-sized people scurrying through streets that meant nothing from 47 stories up. Robert stood at those windows now, watching the sun bleed orange across the skyline, and wondered how he was going to explain to his father that he'd agreed to become a janitor. Not that James Mason was home to explain anything to. A note on the kitchen counter, written by Patricia, their housekeeper, in James's efficient, barely legible scrawl, informed Robert that his father had flown to Singapore for an emergency acquisition and wouldn't be back until Friday. There was money for food delivery, a reminder about his credit card limit, laughably high, and a postscript about making good choices. Robert crumpled the note and tossed it toward the recycling bin. It bounced off the rim and landed on the marble floor. He stared at it for a moment, then walked away. Someone else would pick it up. Someone always did. His phone buzzed with texts from his former Ashford friends, Trevor, Bryce, and Christopher, who'd heard through the prep school grapevine about his second expulsion and were having entirely too much fun with it. Trevor: "Dude, you got kicked out of public school? That's like failing at failing." Bryce: "What's next? Community college? Trade school?" "I'm dying, Christopher. My dad says your dad is probably having a breakdown." Mason Enterprises stock gonna tank from the embarrassment LMAO Robert typed, and deleted 3 different responses before giving up and tossing his phone onto the leather couch. It disappeared into cushions that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and he didn't bother fishing it out. The penthouse felt enormous and empty, the way it always did. 14 rooms for 2 people who barely occupied the same space. His mother had left when he was 12, not left, just relocated to the Hamptons house for her mental health, and visited twice a year, like he was a tourist attraction she'd seen before but felt obligated to revisit. His father lived at the office, occasionally sleeping in the penthouse between continents, a ghost who paid the bills and left notes. Robert had grown up in luxury and loneliness, surrounded by things but absent of presence. He'd never articulated this to anyone, never even fully admitted it to himself, but Rachel's words in the principal's office had cracked something open. Rich daddy. Absent or overworked. Mama probably checks out with pills or charity galas. How had she known? How had a janitor he'd never spoken to before today read him like a book he'd spent 17 years keeping closed? He ordered Thai food he didn't want and ate it staring at his laptop, scrolling through social media feeds full of people having lives that looked effortless and perfect. Trevor at some rooftop party in Soho, Bryce on his father's yacht, Christopher with a girl whose name Robert had already forgotten, everyone moving forward while Robert was stuck in some weird purgatory between expulsions, saved by a woman who cleaned toilets for a living. The absurdity of it hit him around midnight. He was going to spend tomorrow afternoon, and apparently many afternoons after, pushing a mop and emptying trash cans under the supervision of Rachel Gabriel. Robert Mason, whose trust fund could buy a small island, was going to scrub floors. Sleep came eventually, restless and full of dreams where he was falling through floors that dissolved beneath his feet, his father's voice echoing from somewhere above. Make good choices, make good choices, make good choices, make good. The next day at Riverside crawled by like a wounded animal. Robert sat through classes he barely heard, watching the clock tick toward 3:30, with a mixture of dread and something else he couldn't quite name. Anticipation? Curiosity? Maybe just the hollow feeling of knowing you've run out of escape routes and the only way out is through. At lunch he sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria, not because no one would sit with him, but because the students at Riverside had already figured out he was temporary. Rich kids didn't last at schools like this. They were tourists passing through on their way to somewhere better or worse, but never staying. So why bother getting to know them? Jennifer Morrison walked past his table, the girl whose scholarship application he'd nearly torpedoed with his grade hacking stunt. She was small, black, with box braids pulled back in a ponytail and eyes that looked permanently tired from working too hard at everything. She saw Robert, and for a moment their eyes met. "I'm sorry," Robert said, the words surprising him as they left his mouth. "About your scholarship thing. I didn't think—" "No," Jennifer interrupted, her voice quiet but sharp. "You didn't think. You never do. People like you never have to. She walked away before he could respond, and Robert sat there feeling like he'd been slapped. People like you. As if she could know him from one stupid mistake, as if she could reduce him to a category, a type, a cliché. Except maybe she could. Maybe that's exactly what he was. 325 found Robert standing outside the custodian's office, a glorified closet near the school's boiler room that smelled like industrial cleaner and old pipes. He'd changed out of his designer jeans into a pair of joggers that had cost $200, but at least looked less expensive. His t-shirt was plain white, though it was from a brand that charged $60 for the privilege of no logo. The door opened at exactly 3:30, and Rachel stood there with a grey uniform shirt in her hands. "Put this on over your shirt," she said without preamble. "And these." She handed him a pair of industrial rubber gloves that looked like they could survive a nuclear winter. Robert took them, feeling the weight of this moment settling on his shoulders. This was it, the point of no return. He could put on this uniform and accept whatever lesson Rachel thought she was teaching, or he could walk away and accept his expulsion and whatever came after. He put on the shirt. It was too big, hanging off his frame like he was a kid playing dress-up in adult clothes. The name tag read "Trainee" in bold letters that felt like a scarlet letter. "Good," Rachel said, nodding approvingly. "Now, first rule, when you're working with me, you call me Miss Rachel. Not Rachel, not Mrs. Gabriel, not hey you. Miss Rachel. It's respect, and respect is the foundation of everything we're about to do. Understood?" "Yes, Miss Rachel," Robert said, and the formality felt strange on his tongue, almost old-fashioned. "Second rule, I don't care who your daddy is, how much money is in your bank account, or what school you went to before this one. In this closet, in these hallways, when you're working with me, you're just Robert, not Mason, not the millionaire's son, just Robert, a boy learning how to clean up his messes. Can you handle that?" Robert nodded, then caught himself. "Yes, Miss Rachel." Third rule, and this is the most important one, you do every job like it matters. I don't care if you're scrubbing a toilet or emptying a trash can or mopping a floor that'll be dirty again tomorrow. You do it right, you do it with care, and you do it like the person who uses that bathroom or walks on that floor deserves your best effort. Because they do. Everyone does. The moment you start thinking some work is beneath you is the moment you prove you're beneath the work. You feel me? "I feel you," Robert said, though he wasn't entirely sure he did. Rachel handed him a mop that looked like it had seen combat. "We're starting with the second-floor hallway. 6 classrooms, 2 bathrooms, and 1 stairwell. By the time we're done, I want those floors clean enough to eat off of. And before you make a face, remember, this is your mess we're cleaning. Your choices brought us here. So let's see if you've got what it takes to fix them." They walked through the hallways together, Rachel pushing her cart with the easy confidence of someone who'd made this journey 1,000 times, Robert trailing behind like a prisoner being led to his sentence. Students lingered in doorways, watching with undisguised curiosity as Robert Mason, that rich kid who'd hacked the grades, followed the janitor in an oversized uniform shirt. "They're staring," Robert muttered. "Let them stare," Rachel said without turning around. "You worried about what they think? Aren't you?" Rachel stopped and turned to face him, and there was something fierce in her expression. "Baby, I stopped worrying about what people think of me about the same time I realized their opinions don't pay my bills, or raise my son, or get me into heaven. I know who I am. The question is, do you?" Robert opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. Because the truth was, he had no idea who he was. He knew who he was supposed to be, James Mason's son, Ashford Prep's problem child, the boy with the trust fund and the attitude. But strip all that away, take away the money and the name and the safety net, and what was left? "That's what I thought," Rachel said, but not unkindly. "Come on, let's start with the basics. Sometimes you gotta clean the outside before you can see what's on the inside." She showed him how to fill the mop bucket. Hot water, exactly 2 pumps of industrial cleaner, stir but don't slosh. How to wring the mop so it was damp but not dripping, because we're cleaning floors, not flooding them. How to move in long, even strokes that covered ground efficiently without missing spots. "You're pushing too hard," Rachel said, watching Robert struggle with the mop like it was a wild animal. You're trying to muscle it. This isn't about force, baby, it's about technique. Let the mop do the work. You're just guiding it. Robert adjusted his grip, tried to feel what she was talking about. The mop moved easier, glided instead of fought. There you go, Rachel said, and there was approval in her voice that made something warm unfurl in Robert's chest. See? You're learning already. They worked in silence for a while, Robert mopping and Rachel moving from classroom to classroom, emptying trash cans and wiping down desks with the efficiency that bordered on artistry. She missed nothing. Every surface got attention, every corner got checked, every detail got handled. Why do you care so much? Robert asked during a water break, genuinely curious. I mean, it's just cleaning. Rachel fixed him with a look that could have melted steel. Just cleaning? Baby, let me tell you something. My mama cleaned houses in Georgia for 40 years, got up at 5 every morning, came home at 8 every night, scrubbed toilets for people who wouldn't look her in the eye. And you know what she taught me? That honest work ain't never just anything. That doing your job right, whatever that job is a form of dignity. That the world needs people who'll clean the messes others leave behind, because otherwise we'd all be drowning in our own garbage. She took a sip of water from a bottle that looked like it had been refilled 100 times. You think this is beneath you? Rachel continued. This work that keeps these hallways clean so students can learn, keeps these bathrooms sanitary so kids don't get sick, keeps this building running so everyone else can do their jobs. That's not beneath anyone, Robert. That's foundational. That's the work that holds up everything else. And until you understand that, until you can see the value in what seems invisible, you're never going to understand your own value neither. Robert stared at the mop in his hands, seeing it differently now. Not as a symbol of punishment or humiliation, but as a tool, as work, as something that mattered, even if, especially if, nobody noticed. I never thought about it that way, he admitted quietly. Most people don't, Rachel said, but her voice had softened. That's why they're most people, and we're us. Now come on, trainee. We got 3 more classrooms, and you're moving like my grandmother. God rest her soul. By the time they finished at 7:30, Robert's arms ached, his back hurt, and his expensive sneakers were soaked with mop water. But the second-floor hallway gleamed in the overhead lights, spotless and perfect, and Robert felt something he'd never experienced before after a day of work. Pride. Not bad for day 1, Rachel said, inspecting his work with a critical eye. You missed some spots in the corners, and your bathroom work needs practice, but you showed up and you didn't quit. That counts for something. Thanks, Miss Rachel, Robert said, and meant it. Same time tomorrow, she told him. And Robert, wear different shoes. Those fancy sneakers weren't made for real work. As Robert walked out of Riverside into the evening air, his phone exploded with notifications from the Ashford group chat, probably more jokes at his expense. But for the first time, he didn't care enough to check. He'd spent 4 hours mopping floors and cleaning bathrooms, and somehow, impossibly, he felt more accomplished than he had in years. By Friday, Robert's hands had developed blisters that no amount of expensive hand cream could soothe. He stared at them during lunch, raw patches on his palms where the mop handle had rubbed skin into rebellion, and felt a strange sense of accomplishment. These were earned wounds, proof of labor, evidence that he'd actually done something beyond swiping his father's credit card. The cafeteria hummed with its usual chaotic energy, but Robert barely noticed. He was too busy mentally cataloguing everything Rachel had taught him over the past 3 days. The proper dilution ratio for different floor types, the order of operations for cleaning a bathroom, top to bottom always, the specific angle to hold a squeegee to avoid streaks on glass. Information he'd never imagined needing was now taking up residence in his brain alongside calculus formulas he'd already forgotten. Those look painful. Robert looked up to find Jennifer Morrison standing beside his table, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her expression hovering somewhere between curiosity and concern. This was the first time she'd spoken to him since her sharp rebuke earlier in the week. They're fine, Robert said, curling his fingers to hide the blisters. Old habits died hard. Showing weakness wasn't something boys like him did. even when the weakness was visible proof of actual effort. "I've seen you," Jennifer said, and when Robert looked confused, she clarified, "With Miss Rachel after school, everyone's talking about it." Of course they were. Robert Mason, reduced to manual labor, was probably the most interesting thing to happen at Riverside since someone had accidentally set off the fire alarm during a chemistry exam last year. "And what are they saying?" Robert asked, his defenses rising like drawbridges. Jennifer slid into the seat across from him without invitation, setting down a lunch that consisted of a sad-looking sandwich and an apple with a bruise. "Some people think it's hilarious. Rich boy getting what he deserves, that kind of thing. Others think it's—" She paused, searching for the word. "Interesting, like maybe you're not completely hopeless." "High praise," Robert muttered. "Better than what people were saying last week," Jennifer pointed out. She took a bite of her sandwich, chewed thoughtfully. "Miss Rachel's son, Tommy, is in my grade. He says his mum thinks you might actually turn out okay." Something warm flickered in Robert's chest at that. Rachel had talked about him, had said something positive. After only 3 days of watching him fumble with cleaning supplies and complain about his aching back? "Tommy's the one I—" Robert trailed off, shame coloring his cheeks. "I said something about him, about the class trip." "Yeah." Jennifer's expression hardened slightly. "Tommy heard about it. Miss Rachel told him to ignore you, that you were just a hurt kid lashing out. Tommy wanted to punch you, but his mom said violence never fixed ignorance." Robert winced. "She's right. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. I didn't even know him. I was just—" "Being an asshole?" Jennifer supplied helpfully. "Yeah," Robert admitted. "That." They sat in silence for a moment, the cafeteria noise washing over them like ambient soundtrack. Robert picked at the designer lunch his housekeeper Patricia had packed, prosciutto and mozzarella on artisan bread, organic fruit salad, imported sparkling water, and felt suddenly embarrassed by the contrast between his meal and Jennifer's. "Want some?" he offered, pushing the container toward her. "Patricia always packs enough to feed a small army." Jennifer eyed the food suspiciously. "Is this some kind of charity thing? Rich boy feeling guilty?" "Maybe," Robert said honestly, "or maybe I'm just realizing that the world doesn't revolve around me, and sometimes sharing food is just sharing food. Take it or don't. No strings attached." Jennifer studied him for a long moment, then took half his sandwich. "Thanks," she said grudgingly. "This is actually really good. What is this? Some fancy Italian meat?" "Prosciutto." "Of course it is." But she was smiling slightly as she said it, and Robert felt like he'd just passed some kind of test he hadn't known he was taking. They ate together in companionable silence until the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch and the beginning of sixth period. As they stood to leave, Jennifer turned to him. "For what it's worth, the blisters are a good look on you. Makes you seem more real." "As opposed to what?" Robert asked. "As opposed to that guy who walked in here 3 weeks ago thinking he was better than everyone else." Jennifer adjusted her backpack. "That guy was insufferable. This guy? Jury's still out, but at least you're trying." She walked away before Robert could respond, leaving him standing in the cafeteria with blistered hands and something that felt dangerously close to hope. That afternoon's lesson with Rachel involved the school's loading dock, which had accumulated what appeared to be several months' worth of discarded boxes, broken furniture, and mysterious debris that might have predated the Reagan administration. "This," Rachel announced with the enthusiasm of a game show host revealing a prize, "is our project for today. We're going to sort through every piece, decide what's trash, what's recyclable, and what can be salvaged. Then we're going to organize it properly so it can be hauled away next week." Robert stared at the mountain of refuse and felt his brief lunch-induced optimism evaporate. "All of this?" "All of it," Rachel confirmed cheerfully. "Good news is you don't have to do it alone. Tommy's going to help." As if summoned by his name, a kid emerged from behind the loading dock carrying a pair of work gloves. He was 16, maybe 17, with his mother's eyes and a build that suggested he played sports. He wore a Riverside basketball jersey and an expression that told Robert exactly how thrilled he was about this arrangement. "Tommy, this is Robert," Rachel said. her tone making it clear that pleasantries would be observed whether they liked it or not. "Robert, this is my son, Tommy. Y'all are going to work together this afternoon while I handle some maintenance inside. Play nice." She disappeared into the building, leaving Robert and Tommy in the kind of awkward silence that follows when two people who have every reason to dislike each other are forced into proximity. "So," Robert said finally, because someone had to say something, "your mom's pretty amazing." "Don't." Tommy's voice was flat, hard. "Don't try to butter me up by complimenting my mother. She might believe you're changing, but I've seen guys like you before. You're doing this because you have to, not because you want to. The second you're off the hook, you'll go right back to being the same entitled jerk who made fun of kids like me." The words stung, partly because they were harsh and partly because they might be true. Robert didn't know yet which version of himself would emerge from this experience, the reformed one or just the temporarily humbled one. "You're probably right," Robert said, surprising both of them. "But your mom seems to think I'm worth the effort, so maybe we could just get through this without killing each other. For her sake." Tommy studied him with the same penetrating gaze his mother had, like mother, like son, in their ability to see straight through Robert's carefully constructed facades. "Fine," Tommy said finally, "but you pull your weight. I'm not doing this job twice because some rich kid doesn't want to get his hands dirty." "My hands are already dirty," Robert said, holding up his blistered palms. "See?" Tommy glanced at the blisters, and something in his expression softened microscopically. "Those are from the mops, and the floor scrubbers, and yesterday's window cleaning session. Your mum doesn't believe in easing people into things." "No," Tommy agreed, and there might have been the ghost of a smile on his face. "She doesn't. Mama says if something's worth doing, it's worth doing right from the start. Half-arsing is just practice for failure." They worked in silence for a while, sorting through the accumulated detritus of a school year. Robert's job was to drag items to the appropriate piles, while Tommy, who apparently knew the system, directed traffic. Cardboard boxes went left, broken furniture went right, actual trash went center, and items that might be salvageable formed a fourth optimistic pile near the dock's edge. "Why'd you do it?" Tommy asked after about an hour, breaking the silence as they wrestled with a desk that had seen better decades. "Do what?" "Hack the grades, change everyone's scores. You had to know you'd get caught." Robert set down his end of the desk and wiped sweat from his forehead. The late afternoon sun was brutal, and his expensive athletic wear was proving entirely inadequate for actual athletics. "Honestly, I was angry. At my dad, at myself, at being stuck at Riverside when I was supposed to be at Ashford. I wanted to prove I still had power, that I could still make things happen. I didn't think about Jennifer's scholarship or your college scouts or any of the actual people affected. I just thought about me." "That's pretty self-aware for a rich kid," Tommy said, and it might have been a compliment. "Your mom has a way of making you self-aware whether you want to be or not," Robert replied. "It's like she can see inside your head and rearrange your thoughts so you can't lie to yourself anymore." Tommy laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was so unexpected that Robert stopped working to stare. "That's exactly what it's like," Tommy said, shaking his head. "Growing up with her was like having a therapist, a drill sergeant, and a prophet all rolled into one. She always knows when you're lying, even when you don't know you're lying to yourself." "Sounds exhausting," Robert said. "It is," Tommy agreed. "It's also the reason I've got a full ride to state next year. She didn't let me quit anything, even when I wanted to. Especially when I wanted to, she'd say, 'Baby, the world's going to try to make you quit every day of your life. You got to practice not quitting now so you're ready.'" They continued working, and somewhere between the broken chairs and the mystery boxes, something shifted. Not friendship exactly. It was too soon for that. Too much history, or lack thereof, between them. But maybe the foundation of friendship, the recognition that they were both just kids trying to figure things out, under the watchful eye of a woman who saw more than either of them wanted her to. By the time Rachel returned at 7 o'clock, the loading dock was organized, sorted, and ready for pickup. Robert's clothes were filthy, his muscles screamed, and his blisters had blisters. "Good work, both of you," Rachel said, surveying their efforts with approval. "Tommy, head home and get started on your homework. Robert, walk with me." Tommy nodded and headed out, but not before giving Robert a small nod that felt like acknowledgement, maybe even respect. Rachel and Robert walked through the empty school hallways, their footsteps echoing in the after-hours silence. "You and Tommy seem to work well together," Rachel observed. "He hates me less than he did this morning," Robert said. "I'm calling that progress." Rachel smiled. "Progress is progress, baby. Even the small kind counts." James Mason returned from Singapore on Friday night, arriving at the penthouse around 11 with jet lag etched into every line of his face. Robert was still awake, sitting at the kitchen counter nursing a cup of tea and studying his blistered hands like they were artifacts from an archaeological dig. "You're up late," James said, loosening his tie with the mechanical precision of someone who'd performed this action 10,000 times. He looked older than Robert remembered, or maybe Robert was just noticing for the first time how his father wore exhaustion like a second skin. "Could say the same about you," Robert replied. James opened the refrigerator, stared at its contents with the blank expression of someone too tired to make decisions, then closed it without taking anything. "I heard about the second expulsion. Principal Hayes called me in Singapore." Here it comes, Robert thought. The lecture, the disappointment, the conversation about military school or therapeutic boarding programs, or whatever last resort parents of screwed-up rich kids deployed when all else failed. "And?" Robert asked, keeping his voice neutral. "And he also told me about your arrangement with Mrs. Gabriel." James pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, like gravity had suddenly increased. "You're working as a janitor?" "Assistant custodian," Robert corrected, though he wasn't sure why the distinction mattered. 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. James was quiet for a long moment, studying his son with an expression Robert couldn't quite read. Then unexpectedly he laughed, not the bitter, disappointed laugh Robert had anticipated, but something that sounded almost like relief. "What's funny?" Robert asked defensively. "Nothing. Everything." James rubbed his eyes. "Do you know what I was doing at 17? Robert shook his head. His father rarely talked about his past, treating his pre-wealth years like classified information. "I was working the night shift at a warehouse in Brooklyn, loading trucks for minimum wage. Came home at 6 in the morning, slept 4 hours, then went to community college classes in the afternoon. Did that for 3 years straight before I could afford to transfer to a proper university." James looked at Robert's hands. "Got blisters just like those. Thought they'd never heal." "They did though, right?" Robert asked, suddenly needing to know that this pain was temporary. "Eventually. They toughen up, turn into calluses, your hands adapt." James reached across the counter and took Robert's hand, examining the raw patches with surprising gentleness. "But the mental calluses, those take longer. Learning to work hard, to push through when everything hurts, to take pride in a job well done, even when nobody's watching. Those are the calluses that matter." "I thought you'd be angry," Robert admitted quietly. "About the expulsion, about everything." "I'm angry," James said, but his voice was tired rather than harsh. "I'm furious that you threw away opportunities I would have killed for at your age. But I'm also—" He paused, searching for the word, "hopeful. For the first time since you started down this path, I see something that looks like consequence actually sticking. Mrs. Gabriel is doing what I should have done years ago." "What's that?" "Making you earn something. Making you understand that the world doesn't owe you anything just because you're my son." James stood up, poured himself a glass of water. "I've been a terrible father, Robert. I gave you everything except what you actually needed. Boundaries, discipline, someone who cared enough to say no and mean it." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy and unexpected. Robert had spent years building resentment toward his father's absence, constructing elaborate mental defenses against disappointment. But this raw honesty bypassed all of that, hitting him somewhere vulnerable and unprotected. "You weren't terrible," Robert said, though they both knew it was only partially true. "I was absent," James corrected, "which amounts to the same thing. I built an empire but lost my family in the process. Your mother left because I was never there. You became this because I was never there. And I told myself it was okay because I was providing, because money solved everything, because my success would somehow compensate for my absence." He set down his water glass with a decisive click. "I can't undo the past 17 years," James continued, "but I can support what you're doing now. So here's the deal. You stick with Mrs. Gabriel's program, you show me that you're serious about changing, and I'll be here more. Not all the time. I can't promise that, but more. Real presence, not just money and notes on the counter." Robert felt something crack in his chest, some calcified layer of resentment breaking apart. "You mean that?" "I do. But Robert, you have to actually commit. No more pranks. No more thinking you can buy your way out of consequences. No more treating people like they're beneath you. You finish what you started with Mrs. Gabriel, and we figure out who you are beyond your last name." "Okay," Robert said, and was surprised to find he meant it. "Deal." They shook hands across the kitchen counter, and for the first time in years, Robert felt like he was shaking hands with his father rather than with James Mason, CEO. Monday morning brought rain that turned Riverside's parking lot into an archipelago of puddles. Robert navigated them carefully, wearing the beat-up work boots Rachel had insisted he buy over the weekend. They were ugly, practical, and had cost less than any shoes he'd ever owned. He loved them irrationally. The school hallways buzzed with the usual Monday energy, students complaining about homework, comparing weekend exploits, trading gossip like currency. But something was different. As Robert walked to his locker, several people nodded at him. Not the mocking acknowledgement he'd received his first week, but something that looked almost like respect. "Mason!" a voice called out. Robert turned to find Carlos Mendez, the kid whose college recruitment had nearly been torpedoed by the grade hacking incident, jogging toward him. Carlos was built like he'd been constructed from steel cables and determination, the kind of athlete who made sports look effortless through sheer hard work. Robert braced himself for confrontation. He'd ruined this kid's chances, however temporarily. Carlos had every right to be furious. "I heard what you're doing," Carlos said, slightly out of breath. "With Miss Rachel, after school." "Yeah," Robert said carefully. Yeah. That's solid, man. Takes guts to actually face up to your mistakes instead of running away." Carlos extended his hand. "My scouts called back after they saw my real grades. Everything's cool now. But I wanted to say, I respect what you're doing. Growing up is hard. Owning your screw-ups is harder." Robert shook his hand, stunned. "Thanks. And I'm sorry. Really. What I did was—" "Already forgotten," Carlos interrupted. "We're good. Just don't hack the grades again, yeah?" "Definitely not," Robert promised. As Carlos walked away, Jennifer appeared at Robert's elbow, like she'd materialized from the lockers themselves. "You're becoming popular," she observed dryly. "How does it feel?" "Weird," Robert admitted. "I spent my whole life at Ashford being popular because of my dad's money. This feels different." "That's because it is different. This is earned popularity. People are starting to think you might actually be decent underneath all that privilege." Jennifer handed him a folder. "Speaking of earning things, Miss Rachel asked me to give you this. Something about a project?" Robert opened the folder to find several printed pages outlining what appeared to be a comprehensive school beautification initiative. Rachel wanted to organize a student volunteer day to paint classrooms, plant a garden, and refurbish the ancient trophy case. "She wants me to help organize this," Robert asked, scanning the detailed plans. "She wants you to lead it," Jennifer corrected. "Said something about learning the difference between tearing down and building up. Also, she volunteered me to be your co-chair, so we're stuck together on this." "You don't sound thrilled." "I'm reserving judgment," Jennifer said. "But if you screw this up or treat it like a joke, I will personally make sure everyone knows that Robert Mason can't even organize a school cleanup without failing. Clear?" "Crystal," Robert said, feeling the weight of expectations settle on his shoulders. It was uncomfortable, demanding, and somehow exactly what he needed. The bell rang, scattering students to their respective first periods. As Robert headed to class, he caught sight of Rachel through a classroom window. She was emptying a trash can with the same focused attention she brought to everything, treating the mundane task like it was surgery or art or prayer. She looked up, caught his eye, and gave him a small nod. Not praise exactly, but acknowledgement. You're doing the work. Keep going. Robert nodded back and kept walking, the project folder tucked under his arm, his work boots squeaking slightly on the clean floors, his blistered hands already starting to develop the calluses his father had promised would come. He was still figuring out who Robert Mason was, beyond his father's money and his own mistakes. But for the first time in his life, he was actually interested in finding out. The school beautification project began with a disaster disguised as a planning meeting. Robert had reserved the library's conference room for Thursday after school, sent out carefully worded emails to student council representatives, and even created a sign-up sheet that Jennifer had grudgingly approved. He'd expected maybe 10 or 15 students to show interest in volunteering their Saturday to paint classrooms and plant flowers. 43 students showed up. They crammed into a space designed for 20, spilling out into the hallway, perching on tables, sitting cross-legged on the floor. Robert stood at the front of the room with Jennifer beside him, staring at the crowd with growing panic that felt like ants crawling up his spine. "You didn't plan for this many people," Jennifer hissed under her breath. "I didn't think this many people cared about painting classrooms," Robert hissed back. "They don't," Jennifer said. "They care about Miss Rachel. She's been here 23 years. She's helped half these kids with everything from homework to family problems to college applications. When word got out this was her project, everyone wanted to help." Robert felt simultaneously humbled and terrified. This wasn't about him at all. It was about Rachel, about the invisible foundation she'd built through 2 decades of showing up, caring, and treating every student like they mattered. He was just the privileged kid who happened to be holding the clipboard. "Okay," Robert said, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat and tried again. "Okay, everyone, thanks for coming. I'm Robert, this is Jennifer, and we're coordinating Saturday's beautification project for Miss Rachel." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Someone in the back, Robert thought it might be Carlos, started a slow clap that others picked up until the small room thundered with applause for a woman who wasn't even present. Jennifer took over, her natural authority filling the space in a way Robert envied. "We've got 3 main areas: painting 4 classrooms, creating a garden near the front entrance, and refurbishing the trophy case. We need to divide into teams, assign leaders, and coordinate supplies. Robert and I will be floating between groups, but we need people who can take charge." Tommy Gabriel raised his hand from the middle of the crowd. "I'll lead the trophy case project. I've been helping my mom with maintenance stuff since I was 12. I know what needs doing." "Perfect," Jennifer said, making a note. "Who else?" Volunteers emerged from the crowd, students Robert had never spoken to, kids from different social circles and grade levels, all united by their respect for Rachel. Within 20 minutes, they'd organized into 3 functional teams with designated leaders, supply lists, and even a schedule for lunch breaks. Robert mostly stood there feeling useless, while Jennifer orchestrated everything with the precision of a military general. When the meeting finally dispersed, he slumped into a chair and stared at the sign-up sheets now covered in names and phone numbers. "I was completely unnecessary for that," he said. "You got them here," Jennifer pointed out, organizing papers into neat stacks. "That counts for something. You did all the actual work, because I've done this before. Student council runs these things every year, just usually with about 10 people and much lower stakes." Jennifer sat down across from him. "You want to know why Miss Rachel put you in charge? To humiliate me. To teach you how to lead something that's not about you. You're used to being the center of attention, the rich kid, the troublemaker, the one everyone talks about. But this project, it's about Miss Rachel and this school and people coming together to build something instead of tearing it down. You're just the organizer. That's the lesson." Robert absorbed this, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones. "I'm not very good at not being the center of attention." "No kidding," Jennifer said, but she was smiling slightly. "But you're learning. That's what matters. Now come on. We need to go over the supply budget before we present it to Principal Hayes tomorrow." They spent the next hour hunched over Jennifer's laptop, comparing prices for paint and gardening tools and wood stain for the trophy case. Robert learned that Jennifer had a part-time job at a hardware store, that she was taking 5 AP classes while working 20 hours a week, and that her scholarship to Columbia was contingent on maintaining a perfect GPA. "That's why I nearly had a heart attack when you changed the grades," Jennifer explained, highlighting a particularly good deal on exterior paint. "That scholarship is my ticket out. Without it, I'm stuck here, going to community college, watching my mom work herself to death at 2 jobs. You were playing a prank. I was watching my future disappear." The guilt hit Robert like a physical blow. "Jennifer, I know. You're sorry. You've said it like 50 times. She looked up from the laptop, her expression serious but not unkind. "But here's the thing about apologies, Robert. They're nice, but they're just words. Action is what matters. Showing up every day to work with Miss Rachel, organizing this project, actually trying to be better. That's an apology I can believe in." "Is it working?" Robert asked quietly. Am I doing enough?" Jennifer considered this, her fingers drumming on the table. "Ask me again after Saturday. If you show up, work hard, and don't treat this like some photo op to make yourself look good, then yeah, you'll be doing enough." Saturday arrived with unseasonably perfect weather. Blue skies, gentle breeze, temperature in the low 70s. Robert showed up at Riverside at 7 in the morning, wearing his work boots, old jeans, and a t-shirt he'd designated as disposable. His father had surprised him at breakfast with coffee and bagels, eating with him before a 7 a.m. board call, making good on his promise to be more present. Rachel was already there, her van parked near the loading dock, supplies organized with military precision. She wore overalls and a bandana, looking like she was ready to demolish a building or build a new one from scratch. "Morning, baby," she greeted Robert. "You ready for this?" "I think so," Robert said, eyeing the mountain of supplies. "Jennifer's going to be here at 7:30 with the painting crew. Tommy's bringing the trophy case team at 8. The garden crew said 9. "Good." Rachel handed him a clipboard. "Your job today is to make sure everyone has what they need, resolve any problems that come up, and keep the energy positive. This is a celebration, not a chore. We're not just fixing up a school. We're showing these kids what community looks like when it actually works." Students began arriving in clusters, armed with enthusiasm and varying levels of actual skill. The painting crew, led by Jennifer, and including Carlos and several other students Robert now recognized, tackled the first classroom with drop cloths and rollers. The trophy case team, under Tommy's methodical direction, carefully removed decades of grime and began the delicate work of restoration. The garden crew arrived with shovels, seedlings, and enough potting soil to terraform a small planet. Robert moved between groups, solving problems as they arose. When the painting crew ran out of rollers, he made an emergency run to Jennifer's hardware store. When the garden crew discovered the irrigation system was broken, he called his father, who sent over a plumber within an hour. When someone's phone died and they needed music to work by, Robert set up a speaker system and let different students take turns as DJ. Around noon, Rachel called everyone together for lunch. Parents had contributed. A potluck feast spread across folding tables that included everything from homemade tamales to fried chicken to someone's grandmother's famous potato salad. Robert ate standing up, surrounded by students who were paint-splattered and dirt-covered and absolutely radiant with accomplishment. "This is amazing," Tommy said, appearing at Robert's elbow with a plate piled high with food. "The trophy case is going to look incredible. We found trophies from the 70s that were buried in the back. Did you know Riverside won state in baseball in 1979? "I didn't even know Riverside had a baseball team," Robert admitted. "We don't anymore, budget cuts in the 90s. Tommy took a bite of potato salad. "But we're going to display that trophy right up front, along with all the others. Let people remember when this school was something special." "It's still something special," Robert said, gesturing to the 40-plus students currently eating and laughing and celebrating their work. "Just look around." Tommy followed his gaze, and something shifted in his expression. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I guess it is. Thanks for organizing this, man. I know it was mostly for my mom, but it matters. To all of us." "Your mom organized it," Robert corrected. "I just held the clipboard." "You showed up," Tommy countered. "That's more than most people do." By 4 o'clock, the transformation was complete. 4 classrooms gleamed with fresh paint in cheerful colors that made them look like actual learning spaces instead of beige detention centers. The trophy case shined like new, its contents carefully arranged to tell Riverside's forgotten history. And the front garden, previously a wasteland of weeds and sadness, had become a small miracle of flowers and vegetables and a hand-painted sign that read, "Riverside grows together." Rachel stood in the parking lot, surveying the results with tears streaming down her face. Students gathered around her, and someone started singing, one of those old gospel songs that Robert didn't know but somehow felt in his chest anyway. Others joined in, creating harmony that rose into the perfect evening air. Robert hung back, watching from the edges, not quite part of the group but no longer entirely outside it either. Jennifer found him there. "You did good today," she said. "We did good," Robert corrected. "Yeah," Jennifer agreed. "We did." The Monday after the beautification project, Robert walked into Riverside to find the front garden, surrounded by students taking selfies with the flowers. Principal Hayes stood near the entrance, coffee in hand, watching the commotion with something that looked suspiciously like a smile. "Mr. Mason," Hayes called out as Robert approached. "A word?" Robert's stomach dropped. In his experience, a word from a principal never meant anything good. He followed Hayes into the office, that same cramped space where his second expulsion had been interrupted by a janitor, with more faith than sense. "Sit," Hayes said, and Robert sat, preparing himself for whatever punishment he'd unknowingly earned. But Hayes didn't look angry. He looked tired, as always, but also something else. Impressed, maybe, or at least less disappointed than usual. "I got 17 emails over the weekend," Hayes began, pulling up his computer. "From parents, students, even a few teachers, all talking about Saturday's project, all praising the work you and Miss Morrison organized." "Jennifer did most of it," Robert said automatically. "So everyone keeps telling me. But here's the interesting thing, every single email also mentioned you specifically, how you solved problems, how you kept things running smoothly, how you worked harder than anyone expected." Hayes leaned back in his squeaky chair. "Carlos Mendez's mother wrote 3 paragraphs about how you drove to the hardware store twice to get supplies, then stayed until 6 helping clean up. That doesn't sound like the kid who hacked our grade system a month ago." Robert didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. "I'm not going to pretend one good deed erases everything else," Hayes continued. "But it's a start, a real start, and I wanted you to know that I see it. More importantly, this school sees it." He paused. "Miss Rachel asked me to give you this." Hayes handed Robert an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on paper that looked like it had been torn from a journal. "Robert, you're learning that leadership isn't about being the loudest or the richest or the one everyone pays attention to. Real leadership is about seeing what needs doing and making sure it gets done, even when nobody's watching, even when you don't get credit, even when it's hard. Saturday proved you can do that. Now prove you can keep doing it. Miss Rachel P.S. See you at 3:30. The second-floor bathrooms need deep cleaning." Robert felt something warm and uncomfortable lodge in his throat. The note was validation and challenge wrapped together, praise and expectation delivered in equal measure. It was the most meaningful piece of paper anyone had ever handed him. "Thank you," Robert said to Hayes, carefully folding the note and putting it in his pocket. "Don't thank me. Thank Miss Rachel. She's the one who saw something in you worth saving." Hayes picked up his coffee mug, a signal that their conversation was ending. "Now get to class. And Mason, keep it up. I'd like to see who you become when you actually try." Robert left the office feeling like he was floating slightly above the ground, untethered but not unmoored. The hallway seemed brighter, the students friendlier, the whole building different somehow. Or maybe he was different, and that was changing how he saw everything else. The day unfolded with surprising normalcy. Classes happened, lunch happened. Robert sat with Jennifer and Tommy now, an arrangement that had evolved naturally after the beautification project. They talked about homework and college applications, and whether the cafeteria's pizza had always been this bad, or if it was getting progressively worse over time. "Definitely getting worse," Tommy declared. I swear it's a science experiment disguised as food. They're studying how much processed cheese product the human body can tolerate before mutation. Your mum's cooking has ruined you for all other food, Jennifer said, stealing one of Tommy's chips. The rest of us have built up immunity to cafeteria pizza through years of exposure. My housekeeper makes all my food, Robert contributed, then immediately regretted it when both Tommy and Jennifer turned to stare at him. I mean, she cooks for my dad and me, Patricia. She's been with us for years. Must be nice, Jennifer said, though her tone wasn't quite bitter, just observational. It's lonely, Robert heard himself say, surprising everyone, including himself. It's fancy food eaten alone in a giant apartment with nobody to talk to. I'd trade Patricia's cooking for whatever your mum makes, Tommy, if it meant eating dinner with actual family. The silence that followed was loaded with things unsaid. Then Tommy's expression softened. Mum's making her famous pot roast Wednesday night. You should come over if you want. Robert blinked. Really? Don't make it weird, Tommy said quickly. It's just dinner, but yeah, really. Mum's been talking about you non-stop since Saturday. She'd probably like to see you in a context that doesn't involve cleaning supplies. I'd like that, Robert said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. Wednesday evening found Robert standing outside a modest apartment complex in a neighborhood his driver had needed GPS to locate. The building was old but maintained, with window boxes full of flowers and a small playground, where kids were squeezing in final minutes of play before dinner and homework. Robert had agonized over what to bring. Flowers seemed too formal. Wine seemed presumptuous and illegal. He'd finally settled on an expensive bakery cake, then worried it was too expensive, then worried that worrying about it being too expensive was its own kind of condescension. He'd kept the cake. Tommy answered the door wearing basketball shorts and a t-shirt that said, Riverside Basketball in faded letters. You came, Tommy said, like he'd genuinely wondered if Robert would show up. I came, Robert confirmed, holding out the cake box. I brought... This seemed appropriate. Dude, you didn't have to bring anything. But Tommy took the box and opened it, revealing an elaborate chocolate creation that probably cost more than the Gabriel family spent on groceries in a week. Okay, this is fancy. Mum's going to lose her mind. The apartment was small, living room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, but it felt more like a home than Robert's penthouse ever had. Photos covered every available surface. Tommy at various ages playing basketball, receiving awards, graduating from middle school. Rachel at church events, community gatherings, what looked like a college graduation from decades ago. A family, documented and celebrated. Robert! Rachel emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron that said, Blessed and highly favored, and wielding a wooden spoon like a scepter. Welcome, baby. Come in. Sit down. Dinner's almost ready. Tommy, get our guests something to drink. The pot roast was everything Tommy had promised and more. Tender meat, perfectly roasted vegetables, gravy that tasted like it contained secret ingredients passed down through generations. They ate at a small table that barely fit 3 people, passing dishes and talking about everything and nothing. Tell me about your father, Rachel said, during a lull in conversation. Tommy says he's some kind of big deal businessman? CEO of Mason Enterprises, Robert said, trying to make it sound less impressive than it was. He does corporate stuff, acquisitions, investments, that kind of thing. And he's been traveling a lot? Rachel's tone was careful, probing without pushing. His whole life, basically. He built the company from nothing, worked crazy hours, still does. I barely see him most weeks. Robert pushed food around his plate. But we talked recently. He's trying to be around more. He actually had breakfast with me before the beautification project. That's good, Rachel said warmly. Fathers and sons need each other, even when they don't know how to say it. My Tommy's daddy passed when he was just 8. Heart attack sudden as lightning. I've tried to be both parents since then, but I know it's not the same. Tommy reached over and squeezed his mother's hand, a gesture so casual and affectionate it made Robert's chest ache. You've done pretty great, Mom, Tommy said. I've done my best, Rachel corrected, which is all any parent can do. That and pray the Lord fills in the gaps where we fall short. After dinner, Robert helped with dishes despite Rachel's protests. Tommy dried while Robert washed, and they fell into an easy rhythm that felt almost brotherly. "My mom likes you," Tommy said quietly under the sound of running water. "She doesn't usually invite people over. Our home is our sanctuary, she says, but she wanted you here." "Why?" Robert asked. "Because she sees you trying, and because I think she sees herself in you in a weird way. She grew up with nothing, fought for everything, knows what it's like to be underestimated and overlooked. She likes people who surprise her by being better than expected." "I'm not better than expected," Robert protested. "I'm barely meeting minimum requirements." "That's still better than where you started," Tommy pointed out. "Progress is progress, man. Take the win." They finished the dishes, and Rachel insisted Robert take home the leftover pot roast, packing it in containers with the kind of care usually reserved for precious artifacts. At the door, she hugged him, a real hug, the kind that meant something. "You're doing good, baby," she whispered. "Keep going. You're further along than you think." Robert walked to where his driver waited, the leftovers warm in his hands, and felt like he'd just visited a foreign country where people spoke a language he was only beginning to understand. The language of home, of family, of belonging, earned through presence rather than purchased with money. His phone buzzed with a text from his father. "How was dinner?" Robert smiled and replied, "Best meal I've ever had." The first sign of trouble came on a Thursday, 6 weeks into Robert's custodial rehabilitation. He was in the middle of mopping the third-floor hallway. His technique had improved dramatically. Rachel said he could now mop almost as well as her grandmother, which Robert had learned was high praise, when he heard voices coming from the stairwell, familiar voices that made his stomach drop like an elevator with cut cables. "I'm telling you, he's here somewhere, Mason, at a public school. This I have to see." Trevor Hartwick emerged from the stairwell first, wearing a Ashford prep blazer-like armor and a smirk like a weapon. Behind him came Bryce Cunningham and Christopher Park, the holy trinity of Robert's former life, looking around Riverside like anthropologists studying a particularly unfortunate civilization. Robert's first instinct was to hide. His second was to run. His third, which he actually followed, was to keep mopping and pretend he hadn't seen them. "Oh my God," Bryce said, his voice carrying down the hallway with the acoustics of cruel delight. "It's true. It's actually true. Robert Mason is mopping floors." The three of them approached like predators who'd spotted wounded prey. Robert kept mopping, each stroke of the mop a meditation in not panicking, not reverting, not becoming the person he'd been 6 weeks ago when these boys had been his friends. "Mason," Trevor said, standing deliberately in Robert's path. "Buddy, what happened to you? I mean, we heard the rumors, but this is..." He gestured at the mop, the uniform shirt, the industrial gloves. "This is beyond anything we imagined." "I'm working," Robert said simply, trying to mop around Trevor's expensive shoes. "Working," Christopher repeated, like Robert had said something in a foreign language. "You're a millionaire's son. You don't work. You especially don't mop floors at the school that expelled you. That's not how this works." "Maybe that's the problem," Robert said quietly. "Maybe that's exactly how it should work." The three boys exchanged glances, a silent conversation happening in the language of privilege that Robert had once spoken fluently, but was rapidly forgetting. "Dude, what did they do to you?" Bryce asked, and there was something almost concerned in his voice, like Robert had been brainwashed rather than humbled. "This is insane. Your dad must be losing his mind." "My dad supports it," Robert said, which was true and still surprising to say out loud. Your dad supports you being a janitor?" Trevor's disbelief was so complete it bordered on philosophical crisis. "Assistant custodian," Robert corrected, echoing the distinction that had once seemed meaningless but now felt important. "And yeah, he does. Because I'm learning things that actually matter, like accountability and consequences, and how to clean up my own messes instead of paying someone else to do it." "Listen to yourself," Trevor said, his voice sharpening into something cruel. "You sound like an after-school special, learning accountability, cleaning up messes. The Robert we knew wouldn't be caught dead doing this." "Maybe the Robert you knew needed to die," Robert said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Trevor laughed, but it was an ugly sound, stripped of any real humor. So that's how it is. You're better than us now. Too good for your old friends because you found religion or enlightenment or whatever through manual labor. Trevor stepped closer, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Let me tell you what's really happening here. You screwed up so badly that even your daddy's money couldn't save you. So now you're slumming it, playing at being poor, pretending that mopping floors makes you noble. But in 6 months, maybe a year, you'll be back at some expensive school, and this whole experience will be a story you tell at parties about the time you had to work like a regular person. It's poverty tourism, Mason, and it's pathetic. The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to wound, to make Robert doubt, to pull him back into the gravity well of his old life. And the worst part was, some of them landed. Was this just poverty tourism? Was he playing at humility while knowing his trust fund would catch him if he fell? Get out of my school. The voice came from behind them, sharp and commanding. They all turned to find Rachel standing in the hallway, cleaning cart abandoned, hands on her hips, eyes blazing with righteous fury. "Excuse me?" Trevor said, his automatic condescension faltering slightly under Rachel's glare. "I said get out of my school. You're not students here. You're not parents. You're trespassers, and you're harassing one of my workers." Rachel walked toward them with the kind of authority that made Trevor actually step back. "And don't you dare talk to Robert about what's pathetic. You boys walk around in your fancy uniforms thinking you're better than everyone else because of money you didn't earn and advantages you didn't question. Robert's doing something you'll never do. He's actually trying to be better." "Look, lady, we're just visiting our friend," Bryce started. "He's not your friend," Rachel interrupted. "Friends don't come around to mock each other for growth. Friends don't show up to tear someone down for trying to do right. You're just boys who are scared that if Robert can change, it means you might need to change too. And that terrifies you because you don't know who you are without the money and the names and the schools." Christopher opened his mouth to respond, but Rachel held up a hand. "I'm not done. You want to know what's pathetic? It's having every advantage in the world and using it to make other people feel small. It's being given opportunities that most folks can only dream about and squandering them on cruelty and condescension. Robert was like you 6 weeks ago, entitled, careless, thinking the world owed him something. But he's learning. He's growing. He's becoming someone worth knowing." She turned to Robert, her expression softening. "And you, baby. Don't you let these boys make you doubt what you've accomplished. This isn't poverty tourism. This is you learning that work has dignity, that consequences are real, and that the measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they do with it. You've earned every blister, every aching muscle, every moment of respect you've gotten from students in this school. Don't let anyone take that from you." Robert felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes, not from sadness but from something bigger, some emotion he didn't have a name for. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition, or the overwhelming feeling of being truly seen and defended by someone who owed him nothing but had given him everything. "Now," Rachel said, turning back to Trevor, Bryce, and Christopher, "you boys have exactly 30 seconds to leave this building before I call security and have you removed. And trust me, our security guard is 6'5" and doesn't take kindly to prep school kids thinking they run the world." Trevor looked like he wanted to argue, to reassert dominance, to wound Robert one more time before retreating. But something in Rachel's expression, some combination of authority and absolute conviction, made him reconsider. "Whatever," Trevor muttered. "This place is a dump anyway. Mason, when you get tired of playing poor, give us a call. We'll be at actually good schools doing actually important things." They left, their designer shoes squeaking on the floors Robert had mopped, their voices echoing in stairwells that had heard better insults from tougher people. Robert watched them go and felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even relief. Just a kind of quiet certainty that he'd made the right choice in staying. "You okay, baby?" Rachel asked gently. "Yeah," Robert said, and was surprised to find it was true. "I'm okay. Better than okay, actually." "Those your old friends?" "They were. I'm not sure they ever really were, though. Friends shouldn't make you feel small for trying to be better. No, Rachel agreed. They shouldn't. Real friends lift you up, challenge you to grow, celebrate when you succeed. Those boys, they're crabs in a bucket, pulling each other down so nobody escapes. Robert picked up his mop again, the familiar weight of it grounding him. Thank you for defending me. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Rachel said firmly, because that's what I do for my people. And you're my people now, Robert. You've earned that. She squeezed his shoulder once, then returned to her cart, leaving Robert alone in the hallway with his mop and his thoughts and a strange sense of peace. His old life had come calling, and he'd let it walk away. That felt like progress. That felt like victory. The letter arrived on a Saturday morning, delivered by courier to the penthouse with the kind of official weight that suggested important news. James Mason opened it over breakfast while Robert scrolled through his phone, reading messages from Jennifer about a study group for next week's history exam. Robert, James said quietly, and something in his tone made Robert look up immediately. What is it? James set down the letter, his expression unreadable. Ashford Prep, they want you back. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Robert stared at his father, then at the letter, then back at his father, waiting for the world to make sense again. What? Principal Thornton called me last week. Apparently they've reconsidered their expulsion decision. Something about your remarkable transformation and demonstrated commitment to personal growth. James's voice was careful, neutral, giving nothing away about what he thought of this development. They're offering full reinstatement for the spring semester. Clean slate, fresh start, all the advantages you had before. Robert's mind raced. Ashford Prep. The oak-panelled classrooms, the small seminars, the college counselors who could get you into anywhere, the prestige that opened doors before you even had to knock. Everything he'd lost, being handed back to him like it had never been taken away. How did they even know, Robert asked, about the transformation thing? James looked slightly uncomfortable. I may have mentioned your work at Riverside during a conversation with Thornton, not to lobby for readmission, just to explain why I wasn't pursuing legal action over the expulsion. He asked for updates and I gave them. The decision to extend this offer was entirely theirs. Robert picked up the letter, reading the formal language that translated to, "We've decided you're worth the risk now that you've proven you can behave." There was a deadline, 2 weeks to accept or decline. After that, the offer would be withdrawn. What do you think I should do? Robert asked. What do you think you should do? James countered. And there was something knowing in his expression, like he was testing Robert rather than advising him. Robert set down the letter and looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. From up here, everything looked small, manageable, like a game board where pieces could be moved at will. But he'd learned in the past 6 weeks that life wasn't lived from penthouse heights. It was lived in hallways that smelled like industrial cleaner, in cafeterias with questionable pizza, in apartment kitchens where pot roast tasted like home. I need to think about it, Robert said finally. Fair enough, James said. But Robert, whatever you decide, make sure it's for the right reasons. Don't go back to Ashford because it's easier, or because it's what people expect. And don't stay at Riverside just to prove a point. Choose the path that makes you the person you want to become. Monday morning, Robert arrived at Riverside carrying the weight of decision like a backpack full of stones. He went through his classes in a daze, barely hearing lectures, not tasting his lunch. Jennifer noticed immediately. What's wrong? She asked, stealing one of his chips with the casual ease of established friendship. You look like someone died. Ashford wants me back, Robert said quietly, not looking at her. Jennifer's hand froze halfway to her mouth. Oh, yeah. Oh. Tommy, who'd been arguing with Carlos about basketball statistics, went quiet. What are you going to do? I don't know, Robert admitted. Part of me wants to go back. It's a better school, objectively. Better resources, better college placement, better everything. But the other part knows that better doesn't always mean what we think it means, Jennifer finished. She set down her chips, her expression serious. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. That's your choice. But I will say this. The Robert who came to Riverside 2 months ago couldn't have organized that beautification project. He couldn't have earned respect from people who had every reason to hate him. He couldn't have shown up every day to mop floors without complaining. Ashford didn't teach you those things. Miss Rachel did, we did, this place did. But Ashford could teach me other things, Robert argued, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince them or himself. Things I'll need for college, for whatever comes after. Maybe, Tommy said. Or maybe you'll just go back to being who you were, surrounded by people like Trevor and Bryce who'll never challenge you to be better because they're not better themselves. Carlos leaned in, his voice thoughtful. My dad always says you can tell what someone values by looking at who they choose to surround themselves with. You want to be around people who make you better or people who make you comfortable? The question lodged in Robert's chest like an arrow. That afternoon, Robert found Rachel in the custodian's office, reorganizing supplies with the methodical precision she brought to everything. He knocked on the open door, and she looked up, a smile brightening her face. Robert, come in, baby. I was just thinking about you. She gestured to a chair. Sit, sit. Tell me what's on your mind, and don't say nothing, because I can see troubled thoughts from a mile away. Robert sat, the letter from Ashford feeling like it weighed 100 pounds in his backpack. Ashford Prep wants me back. They're offering full reinstatement. Rachel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Not surprise exactly, but recognition, like she'd been expecting this moment. And you're trying to decide if you should go, she said. It wasn't a question. Yeah. What does your heart say? Robert laughed, but it came out bitter. My heart is confused. My brain says Ashford is the logical choice, better education, better opportunities, better future. But my gut says what, baby? Says I'm not done here yet. Says I'm still learning things that matter more than AP classes and SAT prep. Says that if I go back now, I'll just become who I was before, and I don't want to be that person anymore. Rachel leaned back in her chair, studying him with those eyes that saw everything. Let me tell you a story. When Tommy was 12, he got offered a spot at a fancy basketball academy across the state. Full scholarship, best coaches money could buy, direct pipeline to college scouts. It was everything I'd prayed for, a way out, a better life, all the opportunities I never had. Did he go? Robert asked. No. You know why? Because he looked at me one night and said, Mama, if I go there, I won't be me anymore. I'll be who they want me to be. I want to become who I'm meant to be here, with you, with my school, with my people. And I realize that sometimes the better opportunity isn't the one with more resources. Sometimes it's the one that nurtures your soul. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. Robert, I'm not going to tell you what to choose. That's between you and God and whatever future you're trying to build. But I will say this. Ashford will make you successful, no question. But will it make you good? Will it make you kind? Will it teach you that every person matters, that honest work has dignity, that character is built in the hard moments when nobody's watching? No, Robert said quietly. It won't. Then you have your answer, baby. The question isn't which school is better. The question is, which person do you want to be? Robert sat with that for a long moment, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones. He thought about Trevor's sneer, about Jennifer's scholarship stress, about Tommy's quiet respect earned through shared work. He thought about his father's surprised pride, about apartment dinners that felt more like home than penthouse silence, about blisters that had turned to calluses that had turned to capability. I want to stay, Robert said, and as he spoke the words, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. I want to finish what I started here. I want to graduate from Riverside, not because it's better than Ashford, but because it's where I learned who I actually am. Rachel's smile was radiant, proud, maternal in a way that made Robert's throat tight. Then that's what you do, baby. You stay, you grow, you become. And when you walk across that stage at graduation, you'll know you earned every step. Will you be there? Robert asked. At graduation? Baby, I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'll be in the front row, cheering louder than anybody. She stood up, came around the desk, and pulled Robert into a hug. I'm proud of you. Not because you're staying, that's your choice to make, but because you're making a choice based on who you want to be instead of what you think you should do. That's growth. That's wisdom. That's everything I've been trying to teach you." Robert hugged her back. This woman who'd saved him with 5 words and a mop, who'd seen potential in a spoiled rich kid when everyone else had seen a lost cause. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." "Thank me by being who you're meant to be," Rachel said. "That's all the thanks I need." The letter declining Ashford's offer was short, polite, and irrevocable. Robert mailed it on a Tuesday, watching the envelope disappear into the mailbox slot with a sense of finality that felt less like closing a door and more like opening a window. His father had read the letter before Robert sent it, nodded once, and said simply, "I'm proud of you, son." Those 4 words meant more than any trust fund ever could. Spring semester at Riverside unfolded with the tentative optimism of new growth. Robert's grades improved, not because the classes were easier, but because he'd finally learned how to work for something beyond the minimum required to get by. He joined the student council at Jennifer's insistence, discovered he was surprisingly good at organizing events, and even helped coach a youth basketball clinic that Tommy ran on weekends. His afternoons with Rachel continued, though the nature of the work evolved. She taught him building maintenance, basic repairs, the kind of practical skills that no prep school would ever consider worth teaching. How to fix a leaking faucet, patch drywall, replace fluorescent bulbs without electrocuting yourself. Skills that said, you can take care of things, you can solve problems, you don't need to call someone else to fix what's broken. "These are life skills, baby," Rachel explained, while teaching Robert how to unclog a drain without calling a plumber. "The world is full of people who know theories and formulas, but can't change their own oil or fix their own toilet. You learn how things work, really work, and you'll never be helpless." By April, Robert had become such a fixture at Riverside that new students assumed he'd been there all along. The story of his expulsions and redemption had passed into school legend, whispered in hallways like a cautionary tale with an unusually hopeful ending. The only shadow on the horizon was college applications. Robert's academic record was complicated. Stellar grades at Ashford, followed by an expulsion. Decent grades at Riverside, preceded by another expulsion. On paper, he looked like a disaster. His college counselor, a perpetually exhausted woman named Mrs. Chen, had been blunt about his prospects. "Your test scores are excellent, your recent grades are good, and your extracurriculars are impressive," she'd said during their meeting. "But that disciplinary record is going to raise red flags everywhere. You'll need to address it head-on in your personal statement. Tell them what you learned, how you changed, why they should take a chance on you." Writing that essay was the hardest thing Robert had ever done. He went through 17 drafts, each one trying to capture the transformation that had occurred, not in grand moments but in small daily choices. The choice to show up, the choice to work hard, the choice to see people he'd once considered invisible. Jennifer and Tommy read every draft, offering feedback that ranged from helpful to brutally honest. Rachel read the final version, tears streaming down her face, and said, "This is it, baby. This is your truth. Any school that doesn't see your worth after reading this doesn't deserve you." May brought the inevitable question, senior prom. Robert hadn't planned on going. His Ashford friends would be at their own prom, and the idea of showing up at Riverside's felt complicated. But Jennifer had other ideas. "You're going," she announced at lunch one day, her tone brooking no argument. "We all are. Carlos is bringing his girlfriend. Tommy's bringing this girl from his church, and you're coming with our group." "I don't have a date," Robert pointed out. "Neither do I," Jennifer said. "So we'll go as friends. It's not that deep, Mason, it's just a dance." But it wasn't just a dance. It was a milestone, a celebration, a chance to mark the end of something and the beginning of everything else. Robert rented a tux, not the designer one his father suggested, but a normal one from a normal rental shop. He bought Jennifer a corsage after consulting with Tommy about what color matched her dress. He showed up at her house to pick her up, met her mother who hugged him like he was already part of the family, and tried not to think about how different this felt from every other formal event he'd attended. The prom itself was held in Riverside's gym. which had been transformed with lights and decorations that couldn't quite hide the basketball hoops or bleachers, but somehow made them part of the charm. The music was too loud, the punch was suspiciously bright, and the photo backdrop looked like it had been assembled by enthusiastic amateurs. It was perfect. Robert danced with Jennifer, with Tommy's date, who was surprisingly funny, with a group of girls from student council who'd apparently forgiven him for the grade hacking incident. He took ridiculous photos, ate mediocre catered food, and laughed until his sides hurt when Carlos and Tommy staged an impromptu dance battle that brought down the house. Near the end of the night, during a slow song, Jennifer pulled him aside to the gym's entrance where they could actually hear each other. "You look happy," she observed. "I am happy," Robert said, surprising himself with how true it was. "Is that weird?" "Why would it be weird?" "Because 6 months ago, I was at Ashford thinking my life was over because I got expelled. I thought losing that world meant losing everything. But I didn't lose everything. I found this. You guys. Myself, maybe. I don't know. It sounds cheesy when I say it out loud." Jennifer smiled, the lights from the gym casting colors across her face. "It's not cheesy. It's growth. You're not the same person who walked into Riverside thinking he was better than everyone. You're someone who earned his place here. That matters, Robert. That means something." "I couldn't have done it without you," Robert said. "You, Tommy, Carlos, Miss Rachel. You didn't have to give me a chance. Most people wouldn't have." "Most people aren't us," Jennifer said simply. "Now come on, they're playing our song." "We have a song?" "We do now. Move it, Mason." Graduation came faster than Robert expected, arriving like a destination he hadn't quite believed he'd reach. The ceremony was held outside on Riverside's football field, which hadn't hosted an actual football game in years, but still had bleachers and a surprising amount of school spirit. Robert sat with his class, wearing his cap and gown, watching families fill the stands. His father was there. James Mason had cancelled a board meeting in London to attend, sitting in the third row next to Rachel and Tommy. The sight of them together, his two worlds converging, made Robert's throat tight with emotion. When Principal Hayes called his name, Robert Mason, graduating with honours, the cheers from the crowd were genuine warm, celebrating not just his achievement but his journey. He walked across the stage, shook Hayes' hand, and saw Rachel in the stand standing up, clapping so hard her hands must have hurt, tears streaming down her face. After the ceremony, during the chaos of photos and congratulations, Robert found Rachel near the refreshment table. She opened her arms, and he walked into them, letting himself be held by this woman who'd saved him without even knowing if he was worth saving. "I'm so proud of you, baby," she whispered, "so proud I could burst." "I wouldn't have made it without you," Robert said, pulling back to look at her. "You know that, right? You saved my life." "I didn't save anything," Rachel corrected gently. "I just showed you where the tools were. You did the work, Robert. You changed yourself. That's all you, baby. That's who you are now." James approached, slightly awkward but genuine in his gratitude. "Mrs. Gabriel, I can't thank you enough for what you've done for my son. You saw something in him that I'd missed." "I saw what you saw, Mr. Mason," Rachel said kindly. "A boy who needed someone to believe in him and hold him accountable at the same time. That's all any child needs, really. Love and boundaries mixed together." They talked for a while, the Millionaire CEO, the school janitor, and the boy they'd both invested in, and Robert realized that this was family too. Not the family you were born into, but the family you built through showing up, through caring, through choosing to see the best in each other, even when it was hard. 3 months later, Robert received his college acceptance letter from State University, the same school where Tommy would be on basketball scholarship. The acceptance came with a note from the admissions committee. "Your personal statement was one of the most compelling we've read. We look forward to seeing what you'll accomplish here." Robert called Rachel first before even telling his father. "I got in," he said when she answered, his voice shaking with excitement. "Miss Rachel, I got in." Her shriek of joy was so loud he had to pull the phone away from his ear. "I knew it. I knew they'd see what I see. Oh, baby, I'm so proud." When do you start? What's your major? Tell me everything." They talked for an hour, making plans for move-in day, discussing classes and dorms and all the possibilities that stretched ahead like an open road. When they finally hung up, Robert sat in his penthouse bedroom, the same room where he'd spent so many nights feeling empty and alone, and felt full to bursting with gratitude. He thought about the boy he'd been, entitled, careless, lost in a life of privilege that had given him everything except purpose. And he thought about the person he was becoming, someone who knew the value of work, who treated people with dignity, who understood that character was built in the unsexy, daily choice to show up and try. The journey from expulsion to graduation hadn't been easy. It had been uncomfortable, humbling, painful in the way that growth always is. But it had been worth it. Every blistered hand, every aching muscle, every moment of doubt. Because Rachel Gabriel, a black school janitor in her late 40s, had looked at a spoiled millionaire's son and seen not what he was, but what he could become. And then she'd given him the tools, the space, and the second chance he needed to become it. That was the kind of grace that changed everything. That was the kind of love that saved lives. What does true transformation look like in your life? Have you ever had someone believe in you when you didn't believe in yourself? Share your story in the comments below.
Thank you so much for watching this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's even more captivating and full of twists you won't see coming. Go ahead and click the image on your screen right now to watch the next story. You don't want to miss it.